Old World, Florida.
Old World, Florida.
Old World, Florida. Dude, I'm telling you, dude. Dr. Narco Longo came on and dropped the hammer of the god.
America's mother, daughter of Atlantis. God sent the weatherland, the devil sent the Spanish. Florida is Eden, the fountain of youth, Kalia's deception. So Florida is the truth.
Welcome to Florida, baby.
Dr. Narco Longo.
Florida, it is everything. There's too much truth bombs being dropped. I can't digest it all.
Old World, Florida.
Please welcome Dr. Narco Longo.
What's up, guys? How's everyone doing? Happy Monday. Welcome, welcome. We're going to be reading from an interesting book tonight, PDF, but don't call me a PDF file. We're going to be reading from a PDF that I came across a while ago, and it's super interesting. It gets into the ancient Israelites in America stuff, gets into Fountain of Youth, and some pretty interesting things, as you can see from the title, Yahweh, or some rendition of Yahweh, YHWH. We're going to be talking about something like that. And I've talked about stuff like that before on the channel, but yeah, Shrine of the Water Gods is what it's called. Super interesting. It's a short book, really. And it's by Carita Corse. And it's from 1935. So we're going to be reading from that. We've got a lot of cool pictures and video here too to go along with it. Let us know how the audio is sounding. Let me know if this mic's sounding okay. We're going to be playing a little music in the background here too. So we're going to be doing some storytelling, ultimately. We've got our meetup coming up here on the 21st. So we've got, it's going to be here at the Dancing Elephant bookstore in Lake Worth Beach. And everyone's welcome. You don't have to pay to come in. But, you know, you could bring money if you want. There's plenty of stuff here to shop around, books and crystals. So all are welcome. Hope to see you all there. Hope to see you all here for this one. Usually we're going to other cities on the full moon meetups, but this one we're staying at home. So come in and come join in. That's the 21st, which is a Friday. It's also the summer solstice. So why not spend it with like-minded people? Our last one was a blast at Herb Scoop Shop in St. Petersburg. And this one's going to be fun too. Food, drinks. My buddy Rustin is going to be performing, it looks like, playing music. So lots of interesting stuff. clear your calendar. Come on by. The 21st of June. It's a Friday. It is the strawberry moon. Strawberry full moon. Oh, yeah. So let's get into it. This is a story talking about Silver Springs in Florida. Silver Springs. And that's a popular spring, a beautiful blue spring, fresh water. Florida's the highest concentration of freshwater springs in the world, right? So Silver Springs is one of those. It's a high magnitude spring. And we've got some pictures here. Where to go? One sec. There we go. This is what Silver Springs looks like. It's in the Ocala area, which is pretty much central Florida. And that's a shot out of an airplane. But they're very, very famous. Silver Springs is famous for these boats, glass bottom boats, where you can view the spring from inside. So very cool, very interesting. And if you've seen my Fountain of Youth videos, I've talked about Silver Springs in there too. So, oh yeah. This place is trippy. A lot of rich history here. The Seminole Indians actually had a camp, a village, right here. We're going to be looking at that too. So just giving you guys a feel for it visually before we start reading. But make sure to come out to our meetup if you're in Florida. If you're in South Florida, June 21st, that's this Friday. Come on out, y'all. There's Bach Tower. That's where our meetup was 3 or 4 meetups ago. But so that was Silver Springs at the beginning of there. There's Silver Springs. Popular hangout spot. It's got a little beach portion. They do synchronized swimming there. I think that troop right there, this group of girls is from Tarpon Springs, actually, if I'm not mistaken. And they do a lot of kind of like Wiki Watchy and Wakulla. They do a lot of theatrics underneath the water there for entertainment. All right, you guys get the idea. Here's some pictures. That's deep, deep underground. There's flamingos. Silver Springs was famous for flamingos. There's the Seminole Village. There's some Seminoles in a canoe. There's the glass bottom boats. Arrowheads, Indian artifacts. This spring's famous for some curvy bent palm trees, or I guess cabbage palms. But yeah, you guys get the idea. So, okay. Here we go. This is Shrine of the Water Gods. Super cool cover on there. You can see it in the thumbnail. You can see the design in there. So this is kind of like the informal history of Silver Springs with a lot of lore and mythology worked in there. A little map of Central Florida, the tribal territories. Silver Springs from the air. This was released in 1935. Cypress trees. Still beautiful to this day. Recommend everyone go take a trip if you get a chance. Silver Springs near Ocala. Underwater. Look down through the bottom of the boat, you see there. No fat people. God bless America. All year bathing is enjoyed at Silver Springs as the water runs even in temperature. Look at that. Oh my lord. Many attractions make a trip to Silver Springs, never to be forgotten. You can pet a deer. Shrine of the Water Gods by Carita, Corse. Author of Dr. Andrew Turnbull, Key to the Golden Islands, Florida, Empire of the Sun, and Supplementary History of Florida. Very nice. Shrine of the Water Gods, Table of Contents. Prologue, Chapter 1, Prologue. Chapter 2, The Making of the Big Spring. Chapter 3, here's where it gets interesting. Now you guys see why I wanted to read from here. Chapter 3, or Section 3, they're not really that long. Water for Noah's Ark. Chapter 4, AB, or AB, on the Continental Causeway. Chapter 5, Timucua, Kingdom of the Sun. Chapter 6, Violators of the Shrine. Chapter 7, The French in Middle Florida. Chapter 8, The Rival God. Chapter 9, Dest Soliga. I don't know what that is. Chapter 10, The Indian Side of the River. Chapter 11, Delivered to the Enemy. Chapter 12, Open Defiance. Chapter 13, Epilogue. And then the bibliography and notes. Shrine of the Water Gods. Chapter 1, the prologue. I am the sweetness of waters, the light of moon and sun, the perfume of earth, the splendor of fire. I am the soul in all that lives. Time without end am I, and the life of things to be, the spirit celestial and supreme, an ancient Indian hymn. All right. Drop some oranges in the chat if you want me to say what's up by name before we get started here. 200 people in the house. Thanks for joining. I'm going to take a little sip of water before we get into it because we ain't going to be stopping. So, we'll be plowing through it. So, drop an orange if you want me to shout you out. All right, I'm ready to go. Old World Micmac in the house. Shout out to our mods. Thanks for holding it down. Let's make sure we're not banning anyone, banning or silencing or anything, unless we really, really need to, like dropping links and stuff like that, unsolicited. Tribe of Yam, what's up, man? Mar, good to see you. Also, Duro, what's up, my chimp? What's up, my monkey? Hawkeye Pierce in the house. Fourth Emperor. Magpie. Lord Zed. CJ Trickstar, longtime supporter. Grant. Robert Lawson, what's up? Jillian, holding it down. Crystal Vintage. Jim Walker, what's up? My Masonic master. Right? That's the right guy. Dog board. Those are orange hearts. That's good enough. Benjamin Johnson. Que pasa? We got Brandon behind the scenes helping us out too. Doc Carlita. Rawr. What's up? Tangerine. Catherine Brickle. All right. Frosted Mango. What's up? What's up? All right. That's it. Good to see you guys. We're going to get into it. Water worship. Water worship holds first place in the primitive religions of the world. It was the first of all things, the parent of all things. Even the gods themselves were born of water. Adoration of springs, or rather of spirits that ruled them, prevailed everywhere among the American Indians, and a grove by a spring provided a ready-made shrine. Of all the religions best fitted for water worship, the ancient province of Ocala, or Ocala, earliest Indian name for Middle Florida, ranks highest. Some new geographical term should have been invented to describe this expanse of lakes, rivers, sinkholes, and giant springs, for it is more water than solid ground. And in the center of this aqueous land, as within a charmed circle, rises the greatest of springs, whose influence on the history of the native inhabitants was as profound as it was mysterious and carefully hidden. To the modern magicians of science, many things which mystify the Indians are revealed. And so before we trace the strange spell of Silver Springs upon the Indians, let us go back into the unimaginable reaches of time and see how great natural forces shaped this wonder. Chapter 2. The Making of the Big Spring. Late in the life of the world, only about 20 million years ago. Bear with me here on these timelines, whatever. Reading it as written. Don't shoot the messenger. Only about 20 million years ago, the Great Granite Plateau of Florida sank beneath the sea, carrying with it all records of its worn-down mountains, old forests, rivers, and animals. So those who came to a later Florida found no gold, nor even the bones of the hundreds of thousands of dinosaurs which had roamed that lost land. In the warm, shallow sea which then covered Florida lived untold millions of small shellfish called foraminifera, something like that, whose tiny skeletons fell in a gentle rain upon the gaunt frame of the submerged plateau and built a foundation of pure white limestone, 4,000 feet thick. Ocean currents brought clay and sand down from the continent north of Florida and delivered these to the forces building the Florida to be. Meanwhile, the granite foundations stirred like a giant, asleep. The peninsula rose and sank and rocked from side to side, but so slowly that the limestone crust was not broken, but only gently domed, so that finally the island of Ocala rose from the shallow sea, looking much like a prehistoric white whale, 150 miles long and 60 miles wide. Between this newborn land and the mainland flowed the Suwannee Strait. Slowly the mass of soft, soluble rock rose from the sea to a greater elevation than it is now, and the warm, heavy rains of the Old World scored it with channels and funnel-shaped cavities, and hollowed out great underground passages, which widened to become subterranean rivers, flowing into vast, sunless seas of fresh water. Such a sea was to be the source of Silver Springs, greatest of limestone springs. Meantime, the island of Ocala sank like the hull of a wrecked vessel to about its present elevation, and this great underground cavern, which was to produce Silver Springs, lay below the water table of the ocean. But the marvelous purity of the sweet water was safe from contamination by the ocean salt, for the pressure of the great weight of its accumulated waters sealed the sides of the cavern and the surface waters of the island, trickling through the sand and rocks from above, brought fresh strength daily to oppose the invading ocean. The rainfall over only 1/4 the area of Marion County is still great enough to keep the spring full. Over 460 million gallons of water per square mile are added every year to the underground area around Silver Springs. A new ally to resist the ocean's threat is added by the weight of the solids which the rain waters dissolve on their long, slow journey down to that nameless sea. 600 tons of minerals are still carried off in solution every day in the waters of Silver Springs. So we're going to go to some pictures here. I'm going to keep reading. In the relentless passage of the homing waters through the thick crust of primeval limestone, and in the lime they dissolve lies. Oh my God, hang on. In the relentless passage of the homing waters through the thick crust of primeval limestone, and in the lime they dissolve lies. Oh my God. Sorry, a woman wrote this. In the relentless passage of the homing waters through the thick crust of primeval limestone, and in the lime they dissolve, lies the secret of the marvelous brilliancy and transparency of the waters. Small wonder that this prisoned giant burst the walls of his underground dungeon. Through a fissure, oh my God. Through a great fissure 65 feet long and 12 feet high, the water flows swiftly because of the pressure behind it. Many other springs in the basin add to the volume of the water. At its maximum flow, 801 million gallons of water a day come from the springs, enough to supply New York City. The bowl of the spring is 400 feet in diameter, and in places, a depth of 80 feet has been reached, in the deepest fissures. So how are we sounding? We're all sounding good? Give me a thumbs up if everything sounds alrighty, and we'll proceed. Alrighty. Looks like we're good. Chapter 3. Water for Noah's Ark. Having built a mighty spring, secret forces within the earth now set the stage for a second act in the long drama of its history. The time was almost modern, geologically speaking, about 1 million years ago. The old continent north of the island of Ocala became convulsed by inward agonies. Mountains were pushed up in new places. Old highlands sank in others. In this reassembling of lands, submerged Florida rose, carrying with it a fragment of ocean. A fragment of ocean bed which joined it to South America, thus presenting the reborn land in the role of a mighty continent, in the role of a mighty continental causeway. The climate was warm and equable, much as it is now, and the abundant waters nourished rich grasses which covered the rolling prairies of Florida. So the water gods of the great springs beckoned, and the animals of the world responded. Probably never in the history of the world has such a variety and multitude of animals gathered as roamed Florida. Across the causeway from South America came armadillos, sloths, peccaries, tapirs, llamas, to graze and trample the rim of the great waterhole, Silver Springs. From the far north, across another continental causeway, a Bering Strait, the gigantic mastodons led an army of Asiatic immigrants down to the Florida plains. The rhinoceros, bison, horse, lion, great dire wolf, and most feared of all, the saber-toothed tiger. Chapter 4. Ab, or AB, I don't know what that means. Ab, on the Continental Causeway. When we consider how few and small are the wild animals of Florida today, we may wonder what became of all that vast concourse of wildlife. The answer lies partly in the small, light bones of yet another animal, found in company with mastodons near Vero Beach. These are the bones of prehistoric man, who staked out his claim to Florida, and disputed with the mastodon and the saber-toothed tiger his right to rule the waterhole. Memorials of those struggles are to be seen in the huge bones of mammoth and mastodon, which have been taken from the spring. Absorbed in their struggles to survive, neither man nor animals were conscious of the great changes which were again taking place around them. The world grew colder. The waters around Florida receded, absorbed by great ice caps. At the other ends of the world, the epicontinental seas were drained. Gaps were washed in the continental causeways, and connection with South America was broken, like a frayed cable. The ice crept down over North America, reaching Florida, but changing it from an animal causeway to a cul-de-sac, where man and beast were trapped by their destiny. But though it was cold, life was still comparatively easy for these first Florida men, because they had at hand the plentiful animal food, fruits unfailing, and fresh waters they needed. And so they throve, but remained hunters, for thousands of years after men in less favored parts of the world were advancing towards civilization by means of agricultural toil. Chapter 5. Temecula, Kingdom of the Sun. Can we get let's get some pictures of the Temecula, por favor. Yeah. Maybe one of the etchings. Save her for later. We'll be talking about the ladies a little later. Oh, go back. Yeah, that one. Perfect. Nice. Thank you. Chapter 5. Temecula, Kingdom of the Sun. Though animals might not swim the Strait of Bering Sea, man could still paddle canoes across the narrow waterway, and so in comparatively recent years, 5,000 more or less. This is pretty dated. Like I said, don't grill me on these dates. I'm reading it as is, but 5,000 more or less. Ancestors of the American Indian began to come to their new home by the back door. Following with unfailing instinct the old animal trails which traced the high ground, red men entered Florida by Trail Ridge and settled in great numbers in north-central Florida, in the vicinity of Silver Springs. Thus began Temecula, Kingdom of the Sun, where even the sun was a kind of water god. The reason sun and water worship was so prominent in the religions of the southern Indians was that they reached an agricultural stage of civilization, and on the course of sun and showers depended the success of their crops. The water worship of these people was similar to, though less elaborate than, that of the Mexican Indians. The underlying principle was that the sun was the god, the moon the goddess of the universe. The moon was the symbol of moisture or water, the sun of fire. But it was the moon or water goddess who came first and was the creator, not the sun. So the moon was the goddess of mothers and children, and a spring their special shrine. Contrary to Oriental ideas, the feminine deities of the Indians were also the most powerful and represented the spiritual and intellectual qualities, while the sun, though beloved, was often in her power. The Temeculans sacrificed their firstborn children. Brandon, if you could find the picture of that. I think we have that hidden somewhere in there too. The Temecula. Oh, go back a couple. That one. Bingo. Thank you. I know there's a lot in there. But this is the Temecula performing sacrifice of the firstborn. Shout out to Rustin Gross on the Oud track here. He's going to be performing at the upcoming meetup. Let me know how the audio sounds. Throw a fit if it's not good, but alrighty. The Temeculans sacrificed their firstborn children, so that the sun might be freed from the moon goddess and rise. The paradise of the gods, and abode of the sun and moon, was in the east, whence came the mild rains, and the four attendants of these deities were the rain-bearing winds from the 4 points of the compass. Las Casas, famous early Spanish missionary, said of the Mexicans, quote, "Around the principal water springs the natives were wont to erect 4 altars, also for the points of the compass, and in the form of a cross." End quote. The Aztec goddess of rain bore a cross in her hand. Other Indians laid cords across the tranquil depths of a lake to form a great cross. At the intersection, they threw in their offerings of gold and precious stones. Among the Temeculans and later Florida Indians, descent was through the female line. I think there's a picture on that one too, about the female matriarchy. Among the Temeculans and later Florida Indians, descent was through the female line, still carrying out their idea of a creator. The land of the dead was west, a place of rest and sleep, where the sun went and from whence he must be freed by sacrifice. But the dead, who must follow the sun westward, lay with heads to the east, hoping for a future life. An old Florida slave, part Temecula, part Creek by blood, once told his owner that the name for Silver Springs was Suwa Ile Aha, which he translated, sun-glinting water, a name which seems to express the idea of the union of their two major deities in this greatest of springs. Another possible interpretation would be Saw Ile Aha. Saw meaning taker, Ile, death, Aha, bend, or writhing waters of death. Underground waters were feared and revered as the mighty power which daily carried away part of the land. These ideas are little known today because the Indians' religion is an exclusive, not a proselyting one. What he loves most, he says least about. What he loves most, he says least about. Yeah, there's some illustrations on here. So we'll switch back to the text for now. What he loves most, he says least about. But the more carefully we study his history, the more we realize how important are those beliefs as the controlling factors of his actions. When a writer is unable to understand these powerful motives, he is inclined to be fashionably incredulous and to pass them over in silence. But only when he interprets the record in the light of motives does his writing become intelligible. In this account, I have selected mainly those beliefs connected with water worship, though there were many others. The Indians were great believers. All events were miracles, and their faith knew no bounds. Accordingly, nearly all their conduct, their art, and their architecture had a religious significance. My conclusion regarding the early Indian beliefs are based mainly on the works of D.D.G. Brinton, at one time president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the most distinguished authority on the archaeology of Florida, according to the Encyclopedia of American Biography. The beliefs of the Seminoles and other later tribes are mainly to be found in Dr. Swanton's works, published by the Bureau of American Ethnology. The best established and most universal of these beliefs was that of immortality. If the Timucuan warrior should be killed in battle, he died happy, sure that he would someday live again. All he asked was that his bones should be preserved, for he thought it was necessary for them to be buried, to sprout later like seed, and reclothe themselves with flesh. Into such a land of sacred shrines and fanatical fighters entered first the Spaniard, trampling without knowledge or heed these children of nature. His was the opening prelude of the bloody story, but we shall see that not one of the white races who came here were capable of understanding the natives they conquered. With the arrogance of their kind, they condemned and destroyed the native culture because it was different from theirs. Cry me a river. No, just kidding. Chapter 6. Violators of the Shrine. In 1528, signal fires rose above the forest near Tampa Bay and were repeated northward, until finally the news reached Ocali that Narvaez's expedition, with 400 white gods, clad in shining armor, had landed on the coast and were marching inland. Ponce de Leon's second expedition had been here 7 years before, but had not penetrated the interior. No white man had come in force to dispel their illusions, so the Indians still believed in the divinity of the white invaders, because their religion, like the Mexican, said white men would someday come to rule them well and wisely. And these strangers bore terrifying proof of their godliness. Narvaez, the leader, was a great one-eyed giant of a man with red hair. This color was a symbol of the sun god and seemed to prove his divine origin. Then his army had come by water, on the wings of great birds, sailing ships. 50 of the men seemed to have 4 legs and 2 heads, for they were mounted on horses, hitherto unknown to this region. Moreover, they were attended by great savage dogs, possessed of miraculous keenness of scent for tracking Indians. The Floridians were not afraid of death, but Ifa, the dog, was the symbol of the water gods, and so they only tried to hide in the shadows of the forest as the cavalry ranged, looking for Indian scouts to guide them through the country. From the moment captives were brought in, however, the Spaniards began to earn the hatred of the Indians. Narvaez tried to terrify them into submission by methods which had succeeded in South and Central America. These northern Indians, however, were made of sterner stuff. Instead of submitting, Herahigua, chief of Tampa, insulted Narvaez, and for this, his nose was cut off by the enraged leader, and his old mother torn to pieces by the dogs. Other captives, hoping to rid their village of this scourge, told him that northeast lay the rich province of Ocali, and so he marched inland and up the coast, through fearful swamps and dense jungles, which even 300 years later were to defeat American armies in their fights with the Indians. For 15 days he met no living soul, but this was not because the natives were cowed. They were gathering to oppose him at a strategic place. Finally, he entered the western part of the Ocali province and came to the Withlacoochee River, where he had to build rafts to cross. On the other side, 200 Indians met him and fought like panthers, but in vain. Arrows rattled harmlessly on that marvelous Spanish armor, and Indians fell in scores, while even more were captured and chained to the terrible line of native bearers who staggered along under the lash of the commissariat. The Spaniards entered the village so vainly defended, and spread like hungry locusts over the cornfields for which the region was famous. Then the chief, Dolchinachelin, bethought himself of an improvement on the strategy of the tampons. Not tampons, tampons. He would divert these monsters from his own province, and at the same time inflict a blow on his enemies of Appalachia, by himself leading the Spaniards northward into that country. So with a great show of pomp, he went to meet Narvaez. Born as royalty, always traveled in the Timucua. Hang on. So with a great show of pomp, he went to meet Narvaez. Born as royalty, always traveled in Timucua, in a litter on the backs of bearers. 300 warriors followed him. An orchestra of flutes, drums, and pipes led the way, playing to show that he came in peace. Dolchancelin was elaborately decorated, rather than dressed, as the chiefs of Timucua were wont to be. His whole body was tattooed in intricate designs from head to foot, his face freshly painted red, with inflated red fish bladders shining like pearls in his ears. For red was the royal color, symbol of the sun, worn by chiefs to show they were kindred of that celestial body. He appeared even taller than he was, his long hair gathered in a knot on the top of his head, and from this floated heron plumes, also dyed red. A cloak and robe of deerskin, beautifully dyed, were his only garments, but from neck, wrists, knees, and ankles dangled gold and copper ornaments. According to native custom, Dolchancelin exchanged presents with Narvaez and then told him of Appalachia, bounded on the side by the Guasaca Esqui, river of reeds, the Suwannee, that river which the Indians told Fontaneda 20 years later flowed over beds of gold and lapis lazuli. Eagerly, the cruel and greedy Spaniards followed Dolchancelin out of Ocali lands, like credulous children behind the piper of Hamlin. Then, like the piper, Dulcinchellin vanished, leaving them to a terrible fate at the hands of the wilderness and Indians to the north. Well, 330 in the house. How's it going, y'all? Where my danglers at? Where my danglers at, yo? Drop an orange in the chat if you're dangling. Here's a little screenshot here while I take a drink. We've got Seminole Indians, not the Temuco, but the Seminole, but both were matriarchal, matrilineal, like I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to take a sip here. Bear with me. Okay. Nice. Shelia, love that you're digging the tunes. We're gonna keep on moving. Continuing from Shrine of the Water Gods, Okali was saved, but not for long. 11 years later, on May 30th, 1539, an even more gorgeous and awesome company of white gods landed near Tampa, whose wide bay so often betrayed the portals of the Indian land. Hernando de Soto, with 600 foot soldiers and 213 cavalry, was heading inland. This was the most splendid expedition which came to America, and it was marching for Okali. Nothing could save the water gods this time, for the Spaniards had heard of the wealth of Okali. After listening to the reports of Indians near Tampa Bay, De Soto wrote to Cuba his reasons for going to see this fabulous land. He said in this, his only known letter, that the Indians told him northwest lay the country of their enemies, where there was a town called Okali. It is so large, they so extol it. It is so large and they so extol it, that I dare not repeat what is stated. They say that there is to be found in it a great plenty of all things mentioned, and fowls, turkeys in yards, and tame deer tended in herds. How this can be, I do not understand, unless they mean the cattle, of which we heard before coming here. They say there are many traders and much barter, and that there is an abundance of gold and silver, and many pearls. God grant this may be so. Juan Ortiz, a young Spaniard who had been sent with an expedition to search for Narvaez, had been captured by Hirahigua, was found living under the protection of another chief, and became De Soto's interpreter. Ortiz said he had not been into the interior, but had heard of the wealth and power of Okali. The gentleman of Elvas, having talked to survivors of the expedition, said it was reported that the warriors wore helmets of gold. Wow. While Biedma, a member of the expedition, reported that the Tampans said that the Okalis were so mighty that at their shout, birds on the wing fell to the ground. Flattering as this picture was, it sealed the fate of Okali. In spite of the most desperate efforts of its people to conceal the way there, the order of march was painfully slow, hampered as the army was with 300 hogs and a heavy piece of field ordnance. But De Soto, could not bear the delay, while that golden mirage beckoned ahead. With only 10 cavalry, he pushed in advance, ranging the dense woods and vast bogs to find the road. He was 36 years old, full of courage and resourcefulness, but as in this case, too often lacking judgment. Here lay the seeds of later disasters, but his men were devoted to him, for he was spirited, fine-looking, and an Indian fighter with a brilliant record. He tried to force captives to show him the way, but they only led him into ambushes, though for this offense the culprits were given to his dogs to be torn to pieces. This was the most terrible fate the Indians could suffer, because of their peculiar belief regarding bones. Not even the bones of animals were thrown to their own dogs, because they thought it would destroy the game. Animal bones were either hung overhead in their houses or consigned to the kindly protection of the waters of streams. After death, the bones of a Timucuan were carefully cleaned and buried in a sacred mound. If they were destroyed, he thought he would not live again. 4 guides suffered this fate, but the 5th finally collapsed from horror and led them through the swamps. Beyond the bogs, they found the country of Aquera, high, rolling, and pleasant. Here he found the roads so, quote, broad he thought he already had his hand on the spoil. He had told Moscoso, his campmaster, to stay behind until he should find some good reason for advancing. Now he dispatched 2 young men on fast horses to bring up the army. How broad this Ocali road was may be surmised from the fact that De Soto was looking for cities, such as he had seen in Peru, where he had served as Pizarro's second in command. At once we begin to wonder what goal had driven so many pilgrims along that way, that their feet had written so wide and plain a story. We know that it led to that doomed limestone region of Great Springs. We also know that national shrines were as common among the Indians as they were among the Europeans of the period, sought by pilgrims over an area of several hundred miles. Trails and active barter in amulets, lucky stones, and charms existed all over the continent, to an extent unrealized, says Brinton. But even this distinguished scholar was baffled by the meaning of these caminos reales, or royal highways, which he said could certainly not have been mere trails. Knowing that the Indian social life centered around his religion, it does not seem unreasonable to conclude that this great Ocali highway was a holy road. Certainly the desperation with which it was defended seems to indicate some such idea. De Soto found the village of Aquera deserted and sent Indian messengers to the chief, inviting him to a friendly interview. But Aquera would make no terms whatsoever. He vowed that, quote, war never ending, exterminating, is all the boon I ask. You boast yourselves valiant, and so you may be, but my faithful warriors are not less brave. And this too you shall one day prove, for I have sworn to maintain unsparing conflict while one white man remains in my borders. Not openly in battle, though even thus we fear not to meet you, but by stratagem, and ambush, and midnight reprisal. End quote. 20 days the army rested here, feasting on the plentiful corn, nuts, and fruits of the region. But 14 Spaniards strayed from the army in search of food or water, and each in turn vanished. The next day they were usually found beheaded, quartered, and hung on trees. Vainly, De Soto sought to avenge them. He counted the death of 50 of Aquera's warriors, a small return for what he considered Indian mockery. It was probably not mockery, but a ceremonial, for victims were usually offered to the water gods by hanging their bodies on the branches of trees. Finally, De Soto set out along the road, in advance of the army, as was his custom. The region was better, there were more towns and fields, and best of all in his eyes, the road grew wider as he advanced. He passed the towns of Asella and Tokaste, and came to another where some of the people had evidently been unwarned, for they fled to a nearby lake. The interpreter shouted to them, and by threats, persuasion, and force, induced them to come to shore. Thus they secured a guide who showed them the way across the swamp and river of Kale, the Withlacoochee. De Soto had only 26 horsemen with him. These waded up to their necks with clothes and saddles on their heads for 3 crossbow shots, and crossed with ropes in these parts where it was so deep and swift that they had to swim the horses. 30 horsemen crossed a few days later to reinforce him, and lost 1 horse here. They were now in the province of Okali, where the first village was called Uquatan. Here they captured 2 Indians and found so much corn that they sent mule loads back to the army, which was toiling through the swamp and suffering from food shortage. Indians beset them in the swamp, and a crossbowman named Mendoca was killed, and several stragglers wounded. The Indians were not so bold now, however. They had begun to fear the white man's magic, and to believe that his gods must be stronger than theirs, because in spite of their most frantic efforts to stop them, the army marched on. It was never fear of actual things, but this dread of stronger magic, which handicapped the Indian in his fight with whites. So it was quite unopposed. De Soto approached the deserted capital city of Okali, a town of 600 houses. This is an unbelievably larger number of dwellings for a Timucuan town, since each of their great lodges housed 100 or more people. It is the greatest number of houses mentioned by De Soto's chroniclers in his march through the peninsula. Even the great Appalachia was said to have only 250 dwellings. Thus may it be that the number is exaggerated, but the exaggeration is by a contemporary writer, who wrote his account from the narratives of 3 soldiers of the expedition. It is sufficient for us to know, however, that this was an unusually large town, whose great storehouses held quantities of vegetables, nuts, dried grapes, and fruits. Like all Timucuan towns, it was surrounded by a stockade, which our prisoners later used in their own frontier villages, the spiral entrance of which was probably protected by a swift stream, since this was their usual habit. About 1.5 miles below Silver Springs, on Silver River, Dr. Brinton found in 1856 2 Indian mounds with, quote, every evidence of a very large Indian population. Many authorities have supposed the town of Okali to be the neighborhood of what is the present Ocala, or Fort King, 3 miles further. But since the Timucuans preferred swift water to defend the entrance to their towns, and since Dr. Brinton found traces of an unusually large native population beside Silver River, it would seem probable, at least, that here stood Okali. In spite of its beautiful location and the abundance of food, De Soto was of course disappointed, for he found no gold. He took up his residence in one of the great timbered houses thatched with palmetto, and daily sent 3 or 4 Indians into the YHWH scrub to induce the chief Okali to come out. 4 young braves, gaily decorated with plumes, came to see the sights and to prove their own prowess, a thing required of any young man before he could achieve a warrior's standing. De Soto, eager to make friends with their chief, gave them presents and offered them a feast. The Indians accepted his food, though they probably were reluctant to do so, For they had so many food taboos, the Spaniards could hardly have failed to violate one. For example, they would not eat beef or pork for a long time after white people introduced them, because they thought they would become slow and brutish, like a cow or pig. Deer were sacred and venison their favorite meat, for they sought to be swift and strong as a buck. The four visitors ate quietly, however, until they saw the Spaniards were off guard. Then they sprang up and ran away so swiftly that no one could overtake them. But their exploit was to end in failure. Brutus, one of the Spanish hounds, was near, and seeing them run, pursued them. Overtaking them, he pulled them down, one after another, barking ferociously, so that the runaways were paralyzed with terror. Again, the water gods had sided with the enemy. A dog running and barking was associated with the night sun. The moon, that goddess who took the form of a dog, and sometimes swallowed the sun itself. This moon goddess, Akuhiba, had a mysterious power over the water gods, too, and was associated with the darkness and terror of underground waters. The only way to rescue the sun from her power was to kill the dog whose guise she had assumed. At any rate, Brutus's fate was sealed, as will be seen. After 6 days, Chief Okali came out of hiding and visited DeSoto, who did everything to win his friendship. The Spaniards thought he succeeded, for the chief protested undying loyalty and agreed to furnish workers to build a bridge across the Santa Fe River, so that DeSoto might march northward through Potano. In the course of their explorations of Ocali province, DeSoto's men could hardly have missed Silver Springs. But natural wonders and Indian shrines were not remarkable in their eyes, dazzled with the mirage of vast eastern empires. Appalachia was DeSoto's next objective. For this he sought a bridge across the Santa Fe. He could have crossed this river by a natural bridge, but the Indians were giving him no free information. As DeSoto and the chief were talking, the Ocali Indians watched with helpless rage. There was their chief beside a sacred river, smiling, and apparently pointing out places in its depths to a foreign monster who sought to enslave them. Finally, their wrath burst the bounds of discretion, and 500 warriors rose from the thickets across the river, shouting, "You want a bridge, do you? Merciless robbers, you will never see it built by our hands." Then they sent a flight of arrows towards the Spaniards. The dog, Brutus, was being held on a leash by DeSoto's page, but the shouting excited him, so that he tore loose from his guide and sprang into the stream. Vainly the Spaniards called him. He only swam faster toward the Indians. The warriors shot their arrows at him by the hundreds, and he gained the opposite shore, only to fall dead, with arrows sticking out of him like a porcupine's quills. Thus the gods were appeased, but the Spaniards mourned for Brutus, as if he had been human. DeSoto was perplexed and asked Ocali why his people were so angry, since he had showered their chief with kindness. The embarrassed chief explained that they had cast off their allegiance to him because of this fondness for the Spaniards. So DeSoto urged the natives to go back to his people and pacify them. He departed, promising to return and bring workmen for the bridge. But he was not seen again. Whether he regained his authority or not, the Spanish never knew. DeSoto was forced to use a Genoese engineer named Francis to direct his bridge making. Beams with puncheons across, secured by cords, finally made a safe passage for the army. As usual, however, DeSoto went first to see if he could learn more of the country ahead. He ambushed 30 of Ocali's warriors for guides and forced them to show him the way. Doubtless, they were not unwilling to do this, though they knew of Appalachia only by hearsay. On August 11th, he departed, with 50 horsemen and 100 foot soldiers. The rest of the army still stayed at Ocali, much disgruntled because they had not yet caught enough Indians to act as servants. Not knowing that green corn is best eaten boiled on the ear, they laboriously cut it off, pounded it, and sifted it through their shirts of mail, so as to make flour for bread. Here they first ate, quote, little dogs that do not bark, the opossum, which the Indians would not eat because he was a night prowler. Word finally came from De Soto at another town, Caliquen, that he needed the whole force of his army to advance further. The messengers said Indians reported that beyond, Appalachia lay at nothing but water. But De Soto had ceased believing them now. The army believed, however, and thought they would return to Ocali, for the winter at least, as previously planned. And so before they left Ocali, they lightened their loads by burying all their iron tools, and many other things they thought they would not need at once. Gonna take a sip of water. $368 in the chat. What's up, y'all? There we go. Nice, that's a good picture. That's a good one. Alrighty, chapter 7. The French in Middle Florida. Ocali recovered slowly, but was never afterwards unaware of the threat of the white man. Twice the danger had come from the south, but from now on, it was to loom larger and larger from the north. 30 years of comparative peace almost restored the morale of the tribes of Potano, of which Ocali was one, and various successes of tribes in its borders against their neighbors increased their reputation for prowess in war. About 15 years after De Soto had disappeared into the northern wilds, the chief of Canaveral, Othakwa, gave his daughter as a bride to Carlos, then ruler over southwest Florida. As the bride and bridesmaids were journeying towards their new home, a fierce band of warriors from the island of Serope in Lake Weir, 12 miles from the present Ocala, put her escort to flight and carried off the princess and her maidens to their island home. Since the warriors, quote, loved them above all measure, the captives became contented with their lot, and the story of this prowess in thwarting two great chiefs spread through the neighboring tribes. In 1564 came the first threat from the northeast, a French colony, challenging the claims of Spain to Florida, was built near the mouth of the St. Johns River, and the leader, Laudonnière, at once began to play politics with the three great chiefs of Timucua, Saturiba, Utina, and Potano. Saturiba's realm lay nearest the French, around the mouth of the St. Johns, and north, perhaps as far as Cumberland Island. The villages of his archenemy, Utina, were most numerous around Santa Fe Lake, though his own town was near the mouth of the Ocklawaha. Potano, also an enemy of Utina, lived near the present Gainesville. Since Ocali was part of Potano, it was very near the great enemy's headquarters, but fortunately, a vast swamp lay between them and him. Northwest were Hostagua and Onathaqua, chiefs of the Appalachians, whose reputation for wealth was to be a factor in the political game of the French. This brief drama was to have little permanent effect on the Indians, but it remains of interest to us, because the accounts of the French and the pictures of their official artist, Lemoyne, are the most important sources of information on the vanished race of Timucua. Lemoyne went up the St. John's as far as the Ocklawaha, and lived to write his adventures and complete his drawings. In England, under the patronage of Sir Walter Raleigh. His map of Florida, reproduced in the center of this book, is the first one on which Ocali appears, called by him Eloquale. As soon as the French fort was built, Captain Otigny sailed up the St. John's as far as Palatka, with 2 of Saturiba's men as guides. But instead of making war on Utina, as Saturiba had hoped, Otigny gave presents to Utina's men and went back to report that Utina should be cultivated, since he knew where gold was to be found. So a week later, another captain, Vasseur, we're going to say it Vasseur, I don't know, French names. So a week later, another captain, Vasseur, was back again, listening to more tales of gold, in return for which he promised to help Utina fight Potano, quote, a man cruel in war, said Utina's chiefs. Truly the French had mixed their politics badly, and for it they earned the hatred of Saturiba, on whom they depended for food. Still courting the plausible Utina, the French forced Saturiba to give up 2 of Utina's men, whom he had captured. Escorted by Captain Vasseur, Ensign Arlac, and 11 soldiers, these men were returned to Utina's village. Here the crafty chief received them graciously, and again proposed a raid on Potano. So, Arlac and 5 soldiers, with arquebusiers, were left to help him. That means guns, like muskets, like primitive muskets, arquebusiers, an arquebus. Preparations for war consisted largely in ceremonies to propitiate the gods. In the only known original picture of Lemoyne which survives, a chief is shown pouring a libation of water to the sun, then dashing some on the council fire. The only time water was poured upon a fire was in time of war or death, for otherwise it was a sign of disrespect to the water gods. 200 warriors marched toward Potano's villages, with the Europeans in the front ranks, and Potano's men came out bravely to fight them. But when the arquebusiers spouted fire, smoke, and thunder, and the principal chief fell dead, Potano was routed. Again their own gods had betrayed them, for thunder was revered by them, as the voice of the Great Spirit himself, and lightning feared as his weapon of punishment. Things struck by lightning were never touched, whether man, tree, or food. So the men of Potano, though usually fearless and loving war, fled to their towns, which were easily destroyed and the inmates captured or killed. As the fortunes of Potano were those of Ocali, it is probable that these French also laid waste the shrine of the water gods at Silver Springs. The next French adventurer was La Roche Ferrier. The next French adventurer was La Roche Ferrier, who was bent on trade rather than war, visiting the towns of Middle and West Florida and sending back the gorgeous feather mantles of royalty, gold-tipped arrows, and wedges of a green stone like beryl or emerald. These French travelers were eyewitnesses of the great annual Timucuan ceremony of sun worship, which was of course performed by the natives of Ocali in the same manner as the other Timucuans. Lemoyne, the artist, drew a picture of the sun worship and described its procedure. A large open space was selected, facing east and near the water. For Okali, the most probable location would be the eastern side of the spring itself, for such a place would be dedicated to religious purposes and taboo for ordinary use. This was probably why the town was built a mile and a half away on Silver River. Here on the 1st of March, at the time of the first corn planting, the people of the region gathered to offer prayers to the sun god for his favor. The largest stag skin was saved, with head and antlers on, and stuffed full of choice fruits, while garlands of fruits and flowers adorned the horns and body. Thus decorated, they bore it in a procession with music and songs to the sacred shrine. The procession started before daylight, guided to the spot by bonfires at intervals along the road. Behind the stag and the orchestra came the chief on his litter, with his warriors marching after him. All were decked in their best, the exposed parts of their body painted red in honor of the sun. The women, in moss skirts and mantles, wore ornaments of shell and bright stones, with garlands in their loosely flowing hair. When they came to the brink of the spring, the stag was set on a tall tree facing east. The warriors hung up their weapons, for it was an unthinkable crime to quarrel here. Then the company knelt in a semicircle behind the stag, while the chief and his priest stood beneath the tree. In Lemoyne's picture, the priest wears but a scant costume. Other writers say he wore a white deerskin robe, similar to the costume of the Creek priests of a later day. As the first rays of the sun touched the stag's head, the chief began the prayers, the company making responses at proper intervals, bowing their foreheads to the ground in token of their earnestness. At the conclusion of the prayers, all fled down to the spring to cleanse their sins in the sacred waters. Then, leaving the stag there until the next year, they departed for their town to celebrate with feasting and dancing, this, the beginning of their new year. From one of the Frenchmen, we have also a description of these remarkable ceremonial avenues, such as led from Okali town down to the edge of Silver River. The one described by the French was at Edelano, or Drayton's Island in Lake George. Quote, "At the coming out of the villages to go unto the river's side, a man must pass through an avenue about 300 paces long and 50 paces broad, on both sides of which great trees are planted. The boughs thereof are tied like an arch, and meet together so artificially that a man would think it were an arbor made of purpose. As fair, as I say, as any in Christendom. Many a later traveler to Temukua was to testify the beauty of these avenues and the sacred mounds, expressing the sanctity of trees, water, and sun worship. John Bartram saw them in 1766. His son, William, returned to see them 8 years later, and Brinton found them still indistinguishable, as late as 1856. Chapter 8, The Rival God. 350 in the chat. Audio's low? What sounds low? Should sound all right. Yeah, looks like we sound great. All right, well. What's the title of this book? The title of this book is Shrine of the Water Gods, 1935. My sister married Ken Feld's nephew, M. Rose. Is that going to help me in some way? Is that a line of contact? Alrighty. Well, we'll keep it going. 350 in the chat. Appreciate you guys. Chapter 8, The Rival God. Middle Florida knew the French for but a short time. In September of 1565, the whole company were massacred by Menendez, sent out by Philip II of Spain to put an end to French claims to Florida. On the whole, the Indians had rather liked these French, in spite of their equivocal dealings with the chiefs. Satariba was very bitter against Menendez for killing them, and waged relentless war against the Spaniards, partly for that reason. It was perhaps on account of Satariba's uncompromising attitude that Menendez soon succeeded in establishing friendly relations with Utina. After he had overcome the French and founded the village of St. Augustine, the great Spanish commander came up the St. John's River, hoping to find a water route to the Gulf of Mexico. Like DeSoto, Menendez was fortunate in having a former Spanish captive of the Indians, called Fontanedo, in his company, and sent word to Utina that he would like to visit him. Now, besides being under no illusions about white men, Utina had heard disquieting things of Menendez, which filled him with terror. Again, it was not a fear of material things, for Utina was a seasoned warrior, but it had been reported that this new leader of whites had such influence with his own god that he could cause rain to fall at will, having recently brought rain to the crops of a chief on the coast. So this must be a new water god, and one who is greater than him the French worshipped, for they had been overcome. At length, Utina sent word back to Menendez that he would receive him, if he would come with only 20 men, and bring rain for his withered corn. Menendez was very conscientious in his dealings with the Indians, and often tried vainly to deny his power over rainfall. But he agreed to meet Utina with only 20 men. So he left his boats near the mouth of the Ocklawaha and started overland to the village. Halfway there, the sky darkened, thunder rolled, and great drops began to fall. This was too much for Menendez's sense of humor. He slapped his knee and shouted with laughter, saying to a messenger, "Tell Utina, here I come with 20 men and the rain." But it was too much also for Utina's reverence. He fled to the swamps and refused to meet a man with such awful power. On Menendez's return down the river, however, Utina came out of hiding and received a pair of breeches, a green silk doublet, and a hat from Menendez. Quote, "That Indian was much of a gentleman, in face and figure, about 25 years old, and very discreet," wrote Meraz, brother-in-law of Menendez. Give me 1 second here, I'm going to take a drink. So, all right, y'all. Continuing on. Spanish influence spread slowly but surely over Middle Florida. In 1576, Pedro de Andrada, with a company of soldiers, was sent from St. Augustine to aid Utina against Potana and other chiefs. By 1583, all the chiefs had acknowledged Spain's control. The submission of Potana was a spiritual as well as physical one. By 1597, there were 1,500 Christian converts in Timucua, and Spanish priests had pushed far into the interior. The missionaries labored faithfully with their charges, but the result in the minds of the pupils was largely confusion. To their astonishment and horror, the good priests had learned that the Indians already baptized with water to cleanse themselves from sin, received a new name, and considered themselves reborn spiritually. This could be nothing less than the workings of the devil to parody religion, decided the teachers. What difference did that make? Replied the pupils. They worshipped the power of evil as well as of good, giving each due acknowledgement of his power. Many converts fell back into apostasy when they heard they must renounce the devil. Other principles of the new faith were in direct opposition to old ideals. Of the Indians, humility, forgiveness, modesty, none of these had ever been considered virtues by the Indians, but patience and kindness worked slow miracles. In 1609, Utina, with his heir and chiefs, was baptized in St. Augustine. Though the Potanos were among the most warlike of the Timucuan tribes, a little later, about 1655, there arose in this district the great mission center of San Francisco de Potana, with substations in other villages, visited regularly by priests. Though pestilence thinned the ranks in 1617, the arts of civilization were steadily advancing, and the Timucuans were known in the New English settlements to the north as the Spanish Mission Indians. Only once more did this proud race rebel, and that was in 1656, when the tyrannical governor, Robledo, ordered them to bring corn to St. Augustine on their backs. To an Indian man, manual labor was a disgrace, not because he was lazy, but because his belief and manner of life made it seem expedient for his women to do such work. Asked why he did not help raise the corn, the Indian replied, "Women know the secret of fruitfulness and can teach the grain. Indian women were far from being the downtrodden wretches usually imagined. The Indian's house belonged to his wife, and by his own home, he meant the house of his mother. Many tribes were ruled by a chieftainess, advised by a seeress, and led by a warrior maiden. Later, the Seminole women, though they suffered most in the Florida wars, taunted the warriors who went west because they did not die fighting. War was a man's career, with ball playing and hunting to keep him fit at all times. The missionaries had come to understand their charges and protested to Spain against the governor's decree, until finally a new and more reasonable official was sent to St. Augustine. Spain had found the missionaries knew how to employ the energies of these Indians. Under their wise administration, the men learned to raise cattle, hogs, and horses, so that not only St. Augustine, but even Cuba, was supplied with Florida meat. Orange groves of sweet, sour, and bittersweet varieties spread around the mission centers, where figs, plums, and grapes were also raised. And here we've got a grape map, some engravings of the Timucua. So yeah. Carrying on. Chapter 9. Soliga. Destination? I don't know what that means. Destiny or destination. This Eden, becoming too rich and tempting, bordered as it was. Wow. This Eden became too rich and tempting, bordered as it was by wild tribes and predatory Charleston traders. In 1685, an English expedition raided San Francisco de Potano, carrying off church ornaments and slaves to Charleston. From 1697 on, there was a rapid decrease in Timucuan's inhabitants. First the Carolinians sent their Indian allies into Florida, the Yamassees of the coast, and the Creeks of the back country of what is now Georgia. These did so well that Englishmen joined the raiders, and between 1700 and 1706, nearly all of the inhabitants of Timucua were carried off into slavery. But in the meantime, the Yamassees quarreled with their English friends and sought alliance with the Spanish governor of St. Augustine. He received them gladly and allowed them to settle in the almost deserted Timucuan towns. Most of the newcomers centering around the Ocklawaha and the old provinces of Utina and Potano. These Indians were much darker than the Timucuans and less advanced in agriculture, but they absorbed Spanish doctrine and Timucuan tradition with equal facility, so that the old shrines of the water gods and the mission churches received their new converts. It may have been these Yamassees who contributed to the multitude of Florida beliefs, the idea of tree burial, characteristic of their tribe. As has been said in all parts of America, trees, waters, winds, and the cross were objects of worship. The tree symbolized the source of life, and so was sacred to the god of waters. It was this idea which had caused the early Indians to line their ceremonial avenues with trees. These Yamassees carried the symbolism further and placed their dead in hollows of trees, as the receptacle most fitting to preserve them for rebirth. Later, the Creeks in this same region followed the custom, and especially buried very young children in hollow trees, carefully sealed over for fear of drought would follow. If a drought should actually take place, the people sprinkled water all around the tree tomb, and in hope of breaking the evil spell. Even as late as 1822, a traveler in the vicinity of Silver Springs saw the bones of an Indian in a hollow tree. Another belief thought to have originated with the Yamassees was the faith in sabia crystals, a dangerous charm supposed to be found in an early spring flower. Before gathering it, the warrior bathed 4 times that his family might receive its good and not its evil effects. The Spanish missionaries were not so successful in taming these newcomers. They chafed under discipline, and the English came often to wreak vengeance on their former allies, so that the fugitives had to move constantly, the priests following as best they could. Weeds grew high, and the fruit-laden orchards were untended. English maps show a line across the middle English maps showed a line across Middle Florida, in the region of Ocala, as the boundary of Carolina, and traced thereon the route of the slave hunters. Here, deserted Soliga, or destination Soliga, deserted old fields appeared, where Ocala's rich farms had flourished for so many centuries. The inevitable finally happened. England acquired Florida in 1763. Some Spanish Indians went with their old masters to Cuba, or stayed on the coast of South Florida, where they traded with Cubans. Many Yamassees, however, came out of the woods and made friends with the English, so that they were able to reestablish their towns, which had been on the YHWH since 1715. But the Creeks of West Georgia, who had remained faithful to England, now come to Florida and received greatest consideration. Some Creeks had already penetrated as far as Appalachia by 1705. They came in with English raiders and remained there in possession of the ruined towns of the former inhabitants. These were the Lower Creeks or Miccosukes, who became known as Seminoles about 1775. The Upper Creeks, called Muscogees, differing in language and blood from the Miccosukes, began to come from Georgia to Florida about 1750. Sakaufe, their chief, took up his residence in Old Potano, renamed by his people Alachua, or Payne's Prairie near Gainesville, about 1775. Thus he was but a little north of Silver Springs. Governor Grant, the first English executive in Florida, called Sakaufe and the other chiefs to Piccolata on the St. John's and made a treaty with them, which provided that they should be undisturbed in the possession of the lands west of the St. John's River. That country, the old regions of Utina and Potano, then became known as the Indian side of the river. During the 20 years of English rule, the Upper Creeks or Muscogees grew very wealthy, and their cattle and hogs increased to great herds on the Alachua plains. They enslaved the Yamasees, whose villages centered about the Ocklawaha and Silver Springs. The legend of Winona and Chulkota might well belong to this period. According to this story, Chulkota was the chief of a tribe at Silver Springs, probably Yamasee, whose enemy was Okehumpki. The latter is the name of a spring 120 miles south of Gainesville, which could have been named for a Muskogee chief. Winona, Okehumpki's beautiful daughter, loved Chulkota, but her father killed him in a battle, whereupon Winona drowned herself in Silver Springs. The long grasses, glistening and swaying in the current, suggest her lovely tresses. The idea of lovers united in the waters of the spring is quite in keeping with the Indian conception as the place where sun and moon, fire and water, god and goddesses are united. Henceforth, in the opinion of the Indians, Winona would be a handmaiden of the water gods. For those who drowned or struck by lightning, or died of dropsy, were thought to be their special attendants. A Philadelphia botanist, William Bartram, visited Middle Florida in 1774 and wrote his adventures in a travel book, which exerted a widespread and powerful influence. His description of the carefree Indian life enraptured Wordsworth, whose notes are full of, quote, Seminoles and alligators. Ruth and She Walks in Beauty are two poems showing Bartram's influence over the great English poet. The imagination of Coleridge was captured by Bartram's description of the underground rivers, great springs and sinkholes of the Ocala region, whose waters appeared from such mysterious sources. The result colored the poem Kubla Khan, where Alp, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. Like all travelers among the Indians, Bartram was deeply impressed with the strict adherence to religious ceremony. His observations bear out the testimony of others as to the great similarity of Indian beliefs all over the country. There were variations, elaborations, but the main ideas were generally the same. Adair, an early first-hand student of Indian life, said he questioned Spanish Indian captives who had been brought to Charleston and found their ideas similar to those of the southeastern tribes. Adair, too, was impressed with the power of the water cults among the Indians, for he wrote, quote, here's where it gets interesting, guys. This is the key part, the Yahweh references, so pay attention. Quote, men and women turn out of their warm houses, even in the coldest weather, singing their usual sacred notes, yo, yo, at dawn of day, adoring yo, hey, wah, at the gladsome sight of morn, and thus they skip along, echoing praises, till they get to a river, when they instantly plunge into it. They had to immerse themselves 4 times and stay in the water until sunrise. Going in and returning, the chief priest led the procession, followed by the old men, warriors, women with children in arms, and last the older children, according to their size. Anyone failing to observe this rite was punished by raking their legs and arms with snake's teeth. Even the drinking of water had a certain significance. A warrior could not take a pitcher of water from a married woman unless she set the vessel on the ground and retired. Pretty interesting. Some superstitions. Sounds very kosher. Drinking from a skull was supposed to make one wise. Like the Greeks, these Indians thought the souls of the dead must cross water, after which they climbed the Milky Way to Spirit Land. For mixing medicine or bathing, water from eddies in a swift-running stream was necessary, and so the clear, rapid stream of Silver Springs was of outstanding merit. Not only in the morning, but whenever misfortune threatened, the Creek family bathed 4 times to avert evil. When the warrior went to bed, he said, I am going to hunt a dream. And if it was a bad one, he and his family took to the running waters to wash it away. In fact, they were so much in water as to be almost amphibious. It was unlawful to put out even a cooking fire with water. Only when someone died, a kinsman grasped a firebrand in his right hand, brandished it, and dipped it in a stream, allowing it to sink to the bottom. Bartram described the center of each town, a square on an artificial mound, where stood the house, flanked by houses which were open on sides, facing the square. This square formation repeated the 4 points of the compass, or direction of the 4 winds, the rain bringers. Such were the Creek towns near Silver Springs, which were much as the chronicler de la Vega, in De Soto's expedition, found the ceremonial mounds of the earlier Indians. The mounds were miniature representations of their mountains of tradition, the hills of heaven, or peaks on which their ancestors escaped the flood, that earthly paradise from which flowed the rains. When a rainbow appeared, the Creeks thought it shut off the rain, because its 2 ends stood in great springs, the water sliding down the arch into the sacred pools. It is interesting to note that John Bartram, father of William, visited and described Mount Royal, possibly the site of Utina's town. Quote, what a prodigious multitude of Indians must have labored to raise it, he said. North of the tumulus is a fine straight avenue, about 60 yards broad, all the surface of which has been taken off and thrown on each side, which makes a bank of about a rood wide, and a foot high, more or less, as the unevenness of the ground required, for the avenue is as level as a floor from bank to bank, and continues so for about 3/4 of a mile, to a pond about 100 yards abroad and 150 long, north and south. seemed to be an oblong square and its banks 4 feet perpendicular, gradually sloping every way to the water. The pond seems to be artificial. If so, perhaps the sand was carried from hence to raise the tumulus, as the one directly faces the other at each end of the avenue. Here had formerly been a large Indian town. I suppose there were 50 acres of planting ground cleared. So father and son of the distinguished Bartrams recorded their impressions of the old and new Indians of Middle Florida, bringing out the great similarity of customs and beliefs. On the mound was held the green corn busk of the Creeks, a ceremony lasting 4 days, to repeat the magic number. To celebrate the harvest and to celebrate the harvest. An understanding of this ceremony of purification and renewal gives an insight into how well the water colts had survived. In August, when the corn was ripe, 4 days were set aside for the festival. The first day, a priest in white deerskin costume went to the square at daylight. Here he made a new fire for the village with rubbing sticks. 4 young men representing the first 4 brothers of the race brought 4 new sticks, cut from branches extending eastward, for the fire, which was laid. For the fire, which was laid, they killed Bowlegs, his brother. Skip a page? Oh shit, it skips a page. Well, it skips a page. Here. Oh no. Don't know why that happened. But we're missing a page. Page 31. I guess it shifts into talking about the Seminoles there. But guess we're gonna wind it down there. I'm gonna go grab some dinner. We'll continue this part 2. We'll do it again and we'll talk about y'all. But 350 in the chat. Appreciate it. We got some things to promote here, too. So Brandon, if you're listening in, we could pop over to the Monad. Talk about the Monad. Well, isn't that pretty crazy? The YHWH. And I think that's James Adair in Houston. So James Adair was pretty keen on the Israelite Native American connections. And yeah, we're going to be talking more about that, but I thought that was pretty interesting. Well, I've talked about ritual immersion a little bit before, but this is, it goes into a little bit more detail. And we've talked about the mikvah in Judaism, the mikvah, this stairwell for ritual immersion. If anyone knows what a stairwell is, well, not many people know what a stairwell is. Why is it different than a staircase? Well, a stairwell terminates in the water. So. One sec here. We've got some good pictures here. Yeah, I didn't think it would take. Sorry about that. I put the mic down. I was tripping. Forgot I was holding the mic now. But hell yeah, it's a MAGA hat. Make Atlantis great again, baby. That's what I'm talking about. Hell yeah. Make Atlantis great again. These are going to be available for purchase on the website soon. They're available in person here at the Dancing Elephant. So if you're you got free time, you're in Florida, come over and hang out. Come to our full moon meetup on the 21st. It's going to be food, music, entertainment, like-minded people. We had a great time at the last one in St. Petersburg was our last meetup, last full moon meetup. This one will be the 21st. It's a Friday, so you'll be off work. It's 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. Come here. You can bring some money if you want to buy some books, crystals, or just hang out. Seth Balin's going to be here. Rustin Gross, the musician's going to be here. And yeah. Will I be live streaming the debates? Which debates? Crispy, which debates? And this meetup is in St. August. No, not St. Augustine. I'm reading the message. My bad. This meetup will be Lake Worth Beach at the Dancing Elephant. Come on, come on. No charge. You can buy these hats here. We got them for sale. We got plenty of them. Hell yeah. And just waiting on Brandon here. We'll cycle through the ads and then we'll be done for the night. But here's some more pictures. Some Temukua women, maybe Calusa women. Silver Springs, glass bottom boats. There's the famous curved palm tree, or cabbage palm, palmetto tree, whatever it is. Hella manatees at Silver Springs, too. Ocala, also famous for its legends of giants, stories of giant bones being. Maybe a Seminole woman? Uh-oh. Temukua chief. Temukua were giants. Look at that. Not even up to his shoulder. Seminole girls. Silver Springs back in the day. This is Wakulla Springs, but just so you get an idea of what type of animals they're talking about. And, you know, the word dinosaur was used, whatever, don't sue me. But dinosaur to someone like this could mean anything. Could include mastodon, mammoth, saber-toothed tiger, giant sloth, anything that doesn't exist anymore. The statues underneath Silver Springs, I think these were put in for a set of a movie, and they just left them there. Seminole settlement at Silver Springs. Advertisement. Another shot of the glass bottom boats. Seminole Village. Beauty on a palm tree. Peeps hanging out. Child sacrifice being performed by the Timucua. Seminole Village. That might be Miami. That might not be Silver Springs. Now that I see I threw a couple in there. I was unsure. Now I'm seeing what are those royal palms? Those palm trees aren't in Ocala. I don't think so. That's probably Miami settlement. But that's from Silver Springs. All the artifacts. Well, we're going to resume this. We're going to be reading from Shrine of the Water Gods a lot more, but I just wanted to mainly get to that YHWH part. So you can see, we talk about the ancient Israelite connections between Florida Indians. But we're going to be winding it down here. So if you'd like to support the channel, you can buy a copy of the Monad or pre-order a copy of the Monad. This is the work of my brother publishing it, and this is our publishing company. We run out of the bookstore here. This is the hard work of my brother, and this is a book that every truther should have. It's 3 Neoplatonist philosophers, so it's the collected works of Proclus, Plotinus, and Porphyry, and yeah, really good stuff. So discounted right now if you buy that. But basically, this is galloglassbooks.shop. And there's no code on here. You just buy it. It's already discounted. And yes, Scott, YHWH is what we're alluding to. Connection between the Jewish and Christian, Abrahamic word of God, creator, tetragrammaton, the 4-letter word, 4-letter name of God, YHWH, YHWH. That's awfully similar to YHWH, and it's very common to leave out that last syllable. YHWH, leave out the last syllable as a form of reverence or humility, right? Not saying the full name. He who shan't be named, you could say. But yes, that's the point that I was trying to make there. Well, you can buy a copy of the Monad. Do that. That'll help us out. And that's an 800-page book, so you're getting a lot of bang for your buck there. Now, also, if you want some other books, crystals, what else we got? Maybe you can't make it out to our meetup on June 21st, coming up. June 21st. Come hang out 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. here at the Dancing Elephant. But maybe you can't make it. Maybe you're in a different state, a less glorious state. Well, you can go order from the Dancing Elephant bookstore, and you can use a code that goes along with it. I'll help you out. It helps me out. Use the code OWF. You'll get 10% off. This is the link right here. dancingelephant.shop. Easy peasy. The code's OWF. dancingelephant.shop. Boom. Then we've also got some great supplements, proud sponsors of the channel. We've got Moringa Man. You can use the code Old World Florida, spelt out, for, I think this one might be 15% off. Could be 10% off, but one of these is 15% off. And Old World Florida, you'll make, this stuff is very good. Superfood, as like the packaging says. More iron than spinach, more. What does it say? Here, August, can you grab me a moringa package, please? I'm all plugged in. Gotta do it justice. Thank you. Boom. 7 times the vitamin C as in oranges. That's ridiculous. 7 times the vitamin C in oranges, 4 times the beta carotene in carrots, 3 times the iron in spinach, 4 times the calcium in milk, 2 times the protein in milk, 3 times the potassium in bananas, and more fiber than oats. Wow. Oh, where do you get your protein as a vegetarian? Where do you get your vitamin C? Where do you get your iron? Where do you... I've been in the gym for 20 years counting my calories. Eat some fucking moringa, pussy. Jesus. Plant. 1 ingredient. You're over here drinking fucking powdered Liver King jizz. Like, core tenants, yeah. Animal based, jizz based, bro based. All this supplement shit is so gay. Just eat some moringa, okay? Moringa is the only supplement that you should be taking, right? So, the Moringa Man. You can go to themoringaman.com. That's an endorsement if I've ever heard one. You can go to themoringaman.com. You can use the code Old World Florida. And yeah, they've got more on there too. You can buy a whole plant. You got powdered capsules. Capsules are veggie based, so these are good for vegetarians. No adrenochrome. Adrenochrome free, corpse free. And what else we got? We got Sip Blue. This is another proud sponsor of the show. There's the code for the Moringa Man on the screen. But Sip Blue is butterfly pea flower tea. Also, 1 ingredient. It's a superfood. These are both superfoods. Dr. Longo's not fucking around with that, with none of that foo-foo, none of that, fake GNC garbage. Is that real? Try them. Try it for yourself. You'll see. Well, Sip Blue, this will reactivate your Atlantean blue blood DNA and increase blood flow, good for circulation. DNA activation is what this is big for, right? You always see the blue blood, the blue, gods painted blue, right? Their blue skin. So, Sip Blue, you can go to sipblue.com. That's easy. And use the code also OWF. OWF, Sip Blue. Bam. People love Sip Blue. We also got Shilajit on there. Shilajit. So the Moringa Man is ran by my buddy Alex. Sip Blue is ran by my buddy Michael. These are both Florida businesses. You're supporting me, Florida, and ultimately you're getting a good product. So I can shill this stuff all day long. Doesn't make a fucking dent in my conscience. So yeah, buy some Sip Blue, buy some Moringa Man. Moringa. And go order the Monad. Monad's flying off the shelves. Ken Wheeler wrote the introduction, wrote the foreword. Monad's flying off the shelves. Okay, the pre-sale's blowing up. The expectations are way beyond what we thought. So get in while you can on that pre-sale. But Monad is the book of the future. It's setting off the Florida Renaissance, which has long been prophesized. So, all right, guys. Also go to Patreon too. You go to Patreon, find our archived videos. It's in the link. It's in the description. Link is in the description of my YouTube channel and most of my videos or live streams if I remember to do so. Usually don't, but whatever. We're at 2 hours here. Don't want to bore you too much. We'll resume Shrine of the Water Gods eventually. And thanks for joining. Thanks for being here, y'all. Peace. I'm gonna go get some dinner.